These 10 people represent everyone on the planet, and they're lined up according to income. Poorest over here and richest over here. This group represents the poorest 20%. This is the second poorest 20%, the middle 20%, and so on. If we distributed $100 based on current income trends, this group would get about 83 of those dollars. The next richest group would get $10, the middle gets $4, the second poorest group would get $2, and the poorest 20% of humans would get $1. Branko Milanovic, an economist that specializes in inequality, explained all this by describing an economic Big Bang. At first, countries' incomes were all bunched together, but with the Industrial Revolution, the differences exploded. It pushed some countries forward onto the path to higher incomes, while others stayed where they had been for millennia.
I believe this is the defining challenge of our time, making sure our economy works for every working American.
How do you constrain capitalism from doing stupid things that are not in the public interest? You have a democracy that is sufficiently well-functioning that laws and rules limit what can be done. If the democracy is corrupted itself by that capitalist excess, then the first thing you've got to do is get big money out of politics.
Most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution, shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing.
I am convinced that the decisions we make on these issues over the next few years will determine whether or not our children will grow up in an America where opportunity is real.
This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about.